As the conflict rages on in Ukraine, the United States and Western powers are rushing in to send military and humanitarian aid to Kyiv as a huge Russian armored column bears down on the capital. So this column is no joke. It's like 40 miles long, filled with Russian artillery. So very, very dangerous situation. Now, Republicans, however, seem to be taking advantage of the situation by introducing weirdo bills that are very specific, that are trying to stymie the flow of that aid unless Biden secures the Mexican border. So now, of course, this was introduced by two different representatives. One of them is Madison Cawthorn. And of course, you have Matt Rosendale as well. They both introduced bills that mandate that the number of armed force members deployed to Ukraine must be less than the number deployed to the Mexican border. Well, good news, that number is 0. We're not sending boots on the ground. No American service members are going to Ukraine. Now, look, I'm against sending ground forces to Ukraine. The majority of the American people, I believe, are against that. You know why? Because that would start a war between the United States and Russia. And of course, not just Russia, but then you'd also have the rest of NATO getting involved, and it would be World War III. That would doom humanity if the entire thing went nuclear. So that's not a good thing. So no boots on the ground. And by the way, during President Biden's speech in the State of the Union, he reiterated, no boots on the ground. We are not getting involved in a ground war. So that said, this bill, nonsensical, doesn't make any sense. It's a ridiculous bill, but it was a stunt. And why? Why do I say it's a stunt? Because he's just putting it up so he can say, look at me, I tried to fund the border. I tried to secure the border. Now, look, the Republican, again, we have the midterms coming up. Republicans are replaying the hits. They're doing the culture wars. At any moment, there's going to be a caravan. They're going to find a caravan of migrants that are coming towards the border. And by the way, there is a situation going on in the border. There's a lot of refugees. There's a lot of migrants that are, once again, fleeing these Central American countries. You've got the, fallout from the pandemic, of course. And you've got the same situations that were happening previous to the pandemic, where you have people that are being targeted by gangs, etc., and then you have crushing poverty, all that stuff. So you have refugees, you have migrants. Refugees, of course, have a legal right to plead their case inside the border. And now, unfortunately, the Biden response to this has been to continue to use Title 42. Which is a Trump-era policy. In fact, according to the Washington Post, even as the Biden administration continues to use the Trump-era public health rule to deter migration, people from Mexico and the Northern Triangle countries of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras have crossed without authorization in high numbers for several consecutive months. In addition to the pandemic, 2 hurricanes have destroyed livelihoods and homes in Guatemala and Honduras, where extortion and violence from gangs have persisted in many communities, further fueling an exodus. So look, there are crossings. The number of people is high, incredibly high. But you got to understand why they make this trip. It's literally life and death for them. And that's what it is. Now, what's going on in Ukraine, also life and death. And so Cawthorn's response to this is incredibly cruel and heartless. Not only does he want less people to immigrate into the United States, less migrants to come here. And I understand that there's a strain on our immigration system, a strain on our borders. We could definitely do a lot of things to streamline that process, to make it easier. There just has to be some political will, etc. But look, he's trying to stop people from coming in, and he's using the situation in Ukraine to deny people, that are fighting for their country, fighting against Vladimir Putin, supplies, arms, weapons. So now Normally, I don't like the idea of being the world's arms supplier. I have definitely criticized the United States on that front. In this case, though, this is an invasion of a sovereign country. These weapons are being basically sent to Ukraine to try to stop or put a halt to that Russian invasion. Vladimir Putin chose to invade, despite the Ukrainians trying to de-escalate, try to avoid the war. They even, Zelensky had even promised not to join NATO. But it didn't matter. All the promises in the world wouldn't have stopped Vladimir Putin from going into the country. Because that was the plan all along in order to seize Ukraine. And so now, the one thing that I do have issues with, of course, and rightly, you know, people do bring it up, the Azov Battalion. Now, that's the neo-Nazi unit that is part of the Ukrainian defense. They're neo-Nazis. Now, they're a small group of neo-Nazis. They're part of the official Ukrainian Defense Forces. That doesn't mean that the entire Ukrainian defense is neo-Nazis. That's ridiculous. That doesn't mean that Ukraine is run by neo-Nazis. Again, there's no evidence of that. But at the same time, I don't like that these weapons will end up in their hands. I'm against that. Inevitably, that's going to happen. That sucks. But at the same time, they're arming the rest of the Ukrainian army against this Russian aggression. And so it is what it is. But that said, let's go to Cawthorn here. Molly Jong Fast, responding to this, wrote, quote, "This is pretty gross, but it's also very stupid. I'm surprised Louis Gohmert isn't involved in this." Well, you look, gone are the days where Louis Gohmert was the dumbest person in office. The dumbest Republican. Now, political scientist and professor of international relations Dave Grothka also tweeted this, quote, I just can't. Some noted that Putin had earlier in the day bombed a Holocaust memorial site, which is a possible war crime, and a TV tower in Kyiv. The Holocaust site honored 33,000 Jews that Hitler had murdered there, which is actually one of the sites of the largest Nazi slaughters of the Jewish people. So, hey, look at that. For a denazification campaign, they seem to be targeting, I don't know, Jewish Holocaust remembrance sites. Now, one more here, and this is another tweet saying, nobody is better at doing despicable, nonsensical, performative garbage than Trump cult members that happen to be elected officials. Unfortunately, that is correct.